So I went to Sedona, Arizona. What brought me to Sedona, Arizona? Essentially, all this spirituality stuff aside, I just went there to put on a show. It would be a show kind of like this show. You see, I've been doing these shows for a while now, where I get up in front of people and I talk about the crap that is my life, the ridiculousness that is my reality, and the tragic irony of my world. The shows have been fairly well attended. They've been fairly well received, and people have been quite generous with their praise. But here's the problem. Because I've only been doing these shows in Northern California, and more specifically Davis, California, the only people who come out to these things are either friends of mine, family members of mine, or people who recognize my name from some band that I've been in at some point or another. Do you see my point? Everybody in the audience knows who I am. So although the praise I receive is very much appreciated, I can't help but feel like it might be just a little bit more supportive than it is sincere. So I wanted to go someplace where I knew absolutely nobody, but more importantly, nobody knew me. And I started to use my insomnia as a tool to obsess over this idea. I would stay up late at night and picture it. It would be a small town, a tiny little town. You know the kind of town that you drive for 200 miles in the middle of nowhere, and you get to this tiny little place, and then you have to drive 200 miles before you get anywhere else. And nobody in this town ever does anything because there's nothing to do. And nobody in the town goes anywhere because there's no place to go. And then one day, a stranger comes to town, and that stranger would be me. I'd be like a modern-day Harold Hill. You know Harold Hill from The Music Man? And everybody would be talking about the stranger in town. They'd be turning to each other and they'd be saying things like, hey, did you hear there's a stranger in town? There's a what? There's a what? There's a stranger in town and he's putting on a show. A show, a show, a show, a show. Yes! And come Friday night, I would put on a show and everybody in town would come out to see my show and they would let me know what they thought. I'd know what they thought and then I'd disappear. They'd never see me again, but they'd think about me and they'd talk about me for the rest of their lives. That was the plan. So I thought to myself, the middle of nowhere, the middle of nowhere. Where do you find the middle of nowhere? Aha, the desert. And I liked the idea of the desert. I liked the idea of the desert because I liked the idea of heat. I wanted heat. I wanted to sweat. I wanted to sweat so bad. I wanted to sweat so bad, and I started creating this fantasy in my head. I'd be driving in the middle of nowhere, and it would be like 110 degrees outside, but that's okay because I have air conditioning in my Ford Escort station wagon. So I got the air conditioning cranked, and I'm completely comfortable. But then maybe my air conditioning breaks, but that's okay because, you know, it's part of the fantasy. So my air conditioning breaks, I roll down the window, the heat is coming in, and I'm sweating, and I'm sweating, and I'm sweating, but it's okay because it's part of the fantasy. And then maybe, just maybe, like I blow a hole in my radiator hose. So I have to pull over to the side of the road, and I don't know what to do, and it's 5 miles to the next gas station, so I pull out my canteen of water. I don't want any of that Calistoga mineral water crap. I want a canteen. You know the kind of thing I'm talking about, where it's wrapped in green burlap and the water tastes like tin, and it's the only thing that's keeping me alive, but I have to sacrifice every single drop so that I can get 5 miles to the next gas station. And when I get there, there's the most beautiful gas station attendant because he's like fat. He's like 300 pounds. He's wearing overalls. He's got a monkey wrench in his back pocket. He's got a baseball cap on backwards. He hasn't shaved in days, and he's covered in grease and dirt and sweat. 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 Why is he sweating? Because it's so hot. And he changes my radiator hose, and he charges me like $500 for a $20 hose. And I pay him because it's part of the fantasy. And then I go into the bathroom, and I fill up my canteen of water with some very questionable brown water. I go back to my car, I get to my town, I put on my show, and I leave. The heat, the desert, sweat, Arizona. But here's the problem. I know nothing about the geography of Arizona. So I did what anybody who's planning on driving 1,500 miles to the middle of nowhere to put on a one-man show in front of a bunch of total strangers would do. I opened up a map and I closed my eyes and I pointed. Kingman, Arizona. Never been there. Sounds perfect. I called up the Chamber of Commerce at Kingman, Arizona, and I talked to a lady there. I said, hi, my name's Paul Sykes. I'm calling from the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm thinking about coming out to Kingman, Arizona to put on a one-man show. It's sort of about me complaining about my life and my problems and my world, and I just wondered if you thought maybe the people of Kingman would enjoy something like that. And I swear to God, her response was, sounds a bit artsy for our taste. Why don't you try Sedona? That was the first time I had ever heard of Sedona. So I thought maybe this closing my eyes and pointing at a map thing wasn't a great idea, so I thought I would solicit the advice of some of my friends who know a little something about the Southwest. So I turned to my friend Linda, and I said, Linda, I'm thinking about going to Arizona to put on a one-man show. Where should I go? And she said, whatever you do, don't go to Sedona. That was the second time I had heard of Sedona. So I said, why not? And she said, because Sedona is a tourist trap. It's loaded with hippies who worship crystals and vortexes. There's all these artist colonies loaded with artists, and the whole place is completely phony. Don't go to Sedona. So then I turned to my friend Laura, excuse me. I get them mixed up. And I said, where should I go? In Arizona to put on a one-man show. And she said, you should definitely go to Sedona. That was the third time I had heard of Sedona, so I said, why? And she said, because Sedona is a tourist trap. It's loaded with hippies who worship crystals and vortexes. There's all these artist colonies loaded with artists, and it sounds like it would be perfect. So now I didn't know what to do, so I did what I usually do when I have to inspire myself to do anything. I decided I would take out a bunch of articles that have been written about me and take them into the bathroom, which is where I like to read articles that have been written about me. And in this issue of Live and Kicking magazine, the editor, Jerry Perry, was kind enough to write a little something about me. He was very kind and he was far too generous, but I noticed that when he put my little picture, excuse me, up in this corner of the paper, on the other side, kitty corner to my picture, playing at the boardwalk later that night, was a band by the name of Sedona. So I said, forget it, I'm just going to go to Sedona, Arizona. So I called up the Sedona Verde Valley Board of Realtors building, and I booked myself a room there. Now I needed to get some advertising in the paper, so I called up the Red Rock News. And I said, yes, I'm coming out to do a show, and I was wondering if you could just write something in the paper. And she said, I'm sorry, no. And I said, why not? And she said, because we have a very strict rule at the Red Rock News. We will not write anything about anybody unless you live in Sedona, you're married to somebody in Sedona, or you're related to somebody in Sedona. So I asked her to marry me. And her response was, well, are you gay? I don't know why everybody thinks I'm gay. I said, no, I'm not gay. I just want to get in the paper. And she said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. So I turned to my friend, Janet Hethorn, who I was living with at the time. And I said, Janet, oh, by the way, she was a professor at UCD at the time. And I said, Janet, will you give me $5 to go to Sedona? And she said to me, Paul, I'll give you $7 to go to Sedona. So I said, fantastic. So I got back on the phone with the lady and I said, hi, listen, I mean, are you sure you can't write anything? I mean, the show's going to be absolutely free, and I'm working on an arts grant from the University of California at Davis. She said, an arts grant? Yes. Free? Yes. Of course we'll run something in the paper. Fantastic. I have advertising in the paper. I've got a room at the Sedona Verde Valley Board of Realtors building. And before I knew it, me and my girlfriend Audra had a packed car loaded with lighting equipment, sound equipment, and a couple of guitars. It's a long drive to Arizona, but we were looking forward to it. Why? Because it was the second time that we had entered into a relationship, and we were looking forward to the trip because we could talk. We were looking forward to talking to each other and just getting to know each other again. And we were looking forward to having sex. We were just going to pull over to the side of the road whenever we wanted to. We were just going to the side of the road and have sex. We were going to talk and screw and talk and screw and talk and screw and talk and screw and talk and screw. And then, after a brief and far from profitable layover in Las Vegas, Nevada, Audra developed a horrible case of laryngitis and a raging yeast infection. It's true. But we were on a mission. And the next thing I knew, we were over the Hoover Dam and crossing the border into Sedona, into Arizona, and it was then that we hit a blizzard. Not just a blizzard, but the worst blizzard I've ever been in my life. I mean, it was snowing so hard, everybody else on the road gave up. We were driving 15 miles an hour, and there was nobody else on the road. 10 miles an hour, nobody else on the road. 5 miles an hour, nobody else on the road. We were running out of gas, so we pulled into a gas station, and I think here's where I might have almost found my spirituality. For a while there, I think my spirituality might have lied in the face of strangers. Because when we went into that gas station, there was the most beautiful gas station attendant. She was the epitome of Arizona. She was wearing blue jeans and a denim shirt. She had on turquoise jewelry, big turquoise belt buckle. She had a CB radio playing in the background, and I thought she was going to say, "Kiss my grits" at any minute. And we walked up to her and we said, we want $10 worth of gas and 2 cups of coffee. And she said to me, I tell you what, it'll be $10 for the gas But why don't you just take the coffee? It's cold outside. The job is on the house. It amazes me that you can toss a panhandle or a quarter, and the transaction is meaningless to the both of you. But when a total stranger gives you 25 cents worth of coffee in the middle of a blizzard just because it's cold outside, it almost changes your life. So we got back in the car, 15 miles an hour, hit Flagstaff, turned right, down the road to Sedona, and we passed a little sign that I couldn't quite make out. And I said, "Audra, what did that sign?" She said, "Oh, it just said a little something about chains being recommended." It wasn't until later that she did admit to me that it didn't say chains were recommended. It said chains were required. But we didn't have any chains because we were going to the desert. So we headed down the mountainous road, and when I say mountainous road, I mean a mountainous road. I mean, it was this steep, and it was shaped like this, S-curve after S-curve after S-curve. There were no railings on the side of the road to prevent you from the hills that went down for hundreds of feet, and I thought to myself, well, great! Now I'm going to find my spirituality here. I'm going to find my spirituality when I go over the side of a cliff and I die. Because I'm paranoid about driving in cars, because I'm painfully aware of the fact that people die in the cars. So we headed down the mountainous road, and the snow is falling down, and the snow is falling down, and the snow is falling down. And I keep turning to Audra and saying, "Audra, I think we're going to die." And she keeps turning to me and saying, "Honey, sweetie, we're not going to die." But the snow keeps falling down, and the snow keeps falling down, and pretty soon you can't see the lines in the road anymore. So I turn to Audra, and I say, "Audra, I think we're going to die." And she turns to me, and she said, "Honey, sweetie pie, sugar punch, love of my life, we're not going to die." But the snow keeps falling down, the snow keeps falling down, and pretty soon you can't see the road anymore. You can't see where the road ends and the cliffs begin. 2 feet of snow, no chains, bald tires. And I turned to Audra and I said to Audra, "Audra, I think we're going to die." And she turned to me and she didn't say anything. At the time I was convinced that it was because she was just sick of my complaining. But it wasn't until later that she admitted to me it wasn't because she was sick of my complaining, it was because she agreed with me. She thought we were going to die. It was that scary. But we didn't die. We made it to the bottom of the mountain. The snow cleared, the sky cleared, and we were looking down into a valley, and at the bottom of the valley were the lights of my Emerald City, the place I had to go, Sedona, Arizona. Well, I think it's pretty safe to say that my knowledge of the climate of Arizona has probably been limited to that movie in Arizona and old episodes of the TV show Alice. Thanks a lot, Alice.